Okay, well, we are going to do Abraham today, which is going to include the laws of divorce in our marriage Bible study. So we've been going through the Bible, haven't even got out of Genesis. We're going to be kind of pulling stuff in from other parts of God's law on this, and this is a touchy one because I saved Abraham for last rather than first, and the reason for it, someone may argue, and I think it would be a good argument, that if divorce is first marriage in Abraham, and Abraham is one of the first of the three major patriarchs, then you could probably cover it in that context. But what I was hoping to do was kind of establish a normal first, and then go to abnormal. So that was kind of the idea. It was like, well, we'll cover divorce after that, because technically Jesus says it was not so from the beginning, which we'll cover that verse as well. So when we talk about Abraham, we have to go in our Bible to Genesis 12. We also have some other places in the Bible we're going to have to look at. When we talk about Hagar, which is the subject of Abraham's divorce. And if we go to 12, we'll start there, and then we'll just move our way through. Actually, I guess we can go to 11. We'll read 11. We'll read of Abraham's marriage to Sarah first. And we'll cover a little bit about his father. So go to Genesis 11 then, rather than 12, and we'll go to 12 next. So Genesis 11:27 looks like a good place to start there. And just read to the end of the chapter. Who wants to read first? Ed, you want to read?
Verse 27?
Yeah.
How many verses?
No, 11, Genesis 11, from 27 to the end of the chapter.
Oh, to the end, okay. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran begot Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah, in the land of his nativity in Ur of the Chaldees. And Abram and Nahor took them wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren, she had no child. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. And they came unto Haran and dwelt there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah in Haran. And Terah died in Haran.
All right. So, as we've been kind of looking at the patriarchs and we're looking at the things in their life to look at things, there's one thing that we don't have any information on, we don't have any real details on in the life of Abraham. And that is, we do not know how Abraham paid his dowry, so to speak, for his wife Sarah. This is one thing that's entirely left out. But if you look at chapter 11, verses 28 and 29, you can see that it says Abraham and Nahor took them wives, and that's important because we see that they are in the land of Haran. Haran is a place and a man's name. I can't tell you for certain that it's named after the man, but it seems as if Haran probably was the primary patriarch that the place was named after, or maybe he was named after the place he lived. That's not uncommon either. So Haran would have been older than Terah. Terah is Abraham's father, and so his grandfather is Haran, but they also live in the land of Haran. So whether it's calling it the land of Haran, like that was where Haran lived, or whether it's saying that that's the name of the area, we can't be 100% certain. It's a kind of a common misconception that people believe that Abraham was from Ur of the Chaldees. Almost everybody will tell you, just because of some story they heard in Sunday school, that he was from Ur, which is not the case. He's from Haran. That's where his people are from. His tribal inheritance as a Hebrew would have been in Haran, would have been in that part of what we now call Syria, or what is called in the Bible Aram. Aram is the Hebrew word for Syria. And so when you hear of Padan Aram, you remember Jacob and Isaac went back to Padan Aram, or Padan Aram, we say it quick. And that's where they got themselves their wives. Well, you can see Abraham took himself a wife from Haran also, and so did Nahor take himself a wife at the same time. It says Abram's wife's name was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran. And we run back into that story once we get into the stories of Isaac and Jacob, and we meet back into the family through Laban and Bethuel and all of those things. So we've covered that.
So that's the place where it's in the Pentecost verses, Syrian was my father, would be that. Like,
exactly. So Emma's, because she was raised her whole life keeping Pentecost, and we've always used the Pentecost prayer for our Pentecost meal, which is the celebration of the first fruits of the harvest. We always use Deuteronomy 26, which is the prayer that was to be said to the priest. We don't have a priesthood, but we still say the prayer. And it says, a Syrian or an Aramite was my father ready to perish. And so it actually recognizes, before they were Hebrews, they were Syrians or Aramites. And you don't confuse that with the modern day Syrians. However, I will tell you the modern day Syrians are much more Caucasoid people, especially the Christian ones, than the Arabs that are now called Syrians. It's very interesting. The Christian Syrians and Christian Lebanese, you really wouldn't tell them much different than a Greek in a lot of situations, and some of them are incredibly Caucasian, whereas the Arab ones are Muslims, and there's a dividing line right through Syria and Lebanon and all those places where the Muslims are dark, they're dark Arabs, and the Christians are lighter skinned on this side. And they say the reason for that is that the Christians would not breed with their slaves, whereas the Muslims would in ancient times. So there is something to be said there, even to this day, that they're more of a Caucasian people. However, we obviously wouldn't agree that the modern Syrians are representative of our ancient stock. So instead, what we consider from this is that God called the people that he wanted out of that area, and he brought them into a land, and eventually they inherited Canaan. And after, they went to Egypt and all that kind of thing happened. So I'm getting off subject a little bit just to talk about that, but Emma's absolutely right. The reason why Deuteronomy 26, when we say the Pentecost prayer, we say, a Syrian was my father ready to perish, and he went down into Egypt with 70 men. And that's the prayer. And it recognizes that that's the case. But we see that it says that Nahor and Abram took them wives. So we do have, there was some consent of headship that took place. There was some kind of an acquiring of a wife. Nothing is said here that would lead us to think that they stole their wives. They took them from their native home, so that probably was not the case. They didn't Viking them. However, dowry really we have no information on dowry. Now, I guess you could say maybe it wasn't as common during that time or something. So somebody may want to raise an argument and say, how do you prove it? And then when you get to the third aspect, remember there's three aspects of marriage that we're looking at particularly. Dowry is one of those covenant aspects of it, but you have consent of headship, that's covenantal. Dowry, that's covenantal, and that's between father and groom. But when you get to the last element, which is consummation, or what we call sexual union, when two become one, that is a covenant between a man and a woman. And so that's covenantal in a whole different aspect. And so in verse 30 of 11, we see, and Sarah was barren and had no child. Now, it does not give us the information about Sarah getting married, going into the tent like we have with Rebecca and all that. We have some very direct language in other places, but we do know that in order for Abraham to find out she was barren, they would have had to have consummated marriage. So you can deduct the reasoning. That's called deductive reasoning, whereas the other is inductive reasoning that we were talking about with Jacob. So and Isaac. So there's all different ways to figure those things out. There are three elements. Dowry's missing, though, in our discussion. Now, we talked a little bit about it, and I don't want to go over it in detail because we already talked about it, but there's a common misnomer that says, and it's very common, I don't know why people hold on to it because it's semi-easy to prove not to be the case. Sarah, or Sarai, Abraham's wife, is said in 2 lies that he told that it was his sister. And so one is in Genesis 12:11. Genesis 12:11. And I'll just read this. It came to pass that when he was, talking about Abraham, come near to enter Egypt, that he said unto Sarah his wife, Behold, now I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass that when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. Say, I pray thee. Now let me tell you, why would he even say this to her if it were true? So that's something to consider. Say, I pray thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. And it came to pass that when Abram was coming to Egypt, that the Egyptians beheld the woman, that she was very fair. And the prince also of Pharaoh saw her, and commanded her before Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And we know that God then plagues Pharaoh with some plagues, and God actually tells, them in one way or another, and he finds out. Pharaoh calls Abram in verse 18 and says, What is this that thou hast done unto me? Why didst thou not tell me that she was your wife? Why saidst thou, She's my sister? So I might have taken her to me to be a wife. So we know that Pharaoh did not defile the marriage, because he said, I might have done that. So he didn't do it. Now therefore, behold, thy wife, take her and go thy way. And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him that they sent him away, and his wife, and all that he had. And so whenever we see this, we see it happening that time. And then it happens another time in Scripture. And it happens in 20. Yes. Happens in 20. This is in the land of the Philistines, so it's another country. One is in Egypt. The other is then in the land of the Philistines. Verse 20, Abram journeyed from thence towards the south country and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur and sojourned in Gerar. Abraham said to Sarah's wife, She's my sister. Does it again. He's like a chronic liar. And Abraham, king of Gerar, Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. And God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, Behold, thou art a dead man, for the woman which thou hast taken, for she is a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, wilt thou also slay a righteous nation? Said he not to me, She's my sister. And she herself said, He is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and the innocency of my hands I've done this. And God said to him in a dream, Yea, I know that thou did it in the integrity of your heart, for I also withheld thee from sinning against me. Therefore suffer I thee not to touch her. I'll just make one point. This is one of those verses where people say only Israel can sin. Well, apparently that's not the case, because Abimelech could have sinned if he would have committed adultery with another man's wife. Verse 7, Now therefore restore the man his wife, for he is a prophet, and he shall pray for thee, and thou shalt live. And if thou restore her not, know that thou shalt surely die, and all that are thine. Therefore Abimelech rose up early in the morning. He called his servants. He told all these things in their ears. The men became sore afraid. Abimelech called Abraham and said unto him, Why hast thou done this? What hast thou done unto us? And what have I offended thee? And thou hast brought on me and all my kingdom a great sin. Thou hast done deeds unto me that ought not be done. Interesting, even the men of Gerar knew that it was a sin to commit adultery. Much better people, apparently, than what you get in Egypt and the Canaanite lands. And Abimelech said to Abraham, What sawest thou, and that thou hast done this thing? And Abraham said, Because I thought, surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will slay me for my wife's sake. And yet indeed, now here's where it is, yet indeed, she is my sister, she is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And it came to pass that when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said unto her, This is the kindness which thou shalt show me, that at every place where we come, say of me, He's my brother. So how I read this and understand this is that this is the lie that he's telling. This is the lie I told my wife to tell you. That indeed, you're my sister, you're the daughter of my father. Here, we're going to, so, when you tell a lie with someone else, you want to corroborate your stories so they add up at the end. So if, you get caught in one way or another, or you're qualifying each other, that's what he's doing ahead of time. He says, here's what we're going to tell everybody. And you can see it follows suit. The funny thing is Isaac does it too. Isaac does it with Rebekah, and we know 100% that Rebekah was not Isaac's sister. It was his cousin. Now, the Geneva Bible has a commentary note in this section that says that you could read the word sister as a relative on his father's side. So a Hebrew scholar who knows more about Hebrew than me says that you could read this, and it could read, it's my female cousin, basically, on my father's side.
I know many languages, like cousin and sister are interchangeable.
Yeah.
Or brother and cousin.
The problem is there's a law of God that's contrary to this. So when I read it, this is how I read it. I don't believe this is an honest statement, even if you retranslate the words to mean sister by cousin descent. I think that this is the lie being told. I indeed said to her this. This is what we said. So that's how I read it. You don't have to agree with me. But one thing I would strongly caution you on is to not agree with the fact that Abraham and Sarah were brother and sister, which directly contradicts the law of God. And since we know in Genesis chapter 26, the same lies were told in that context that with Isaac, that we know that this is kind of like a common family lie to tell people about your wife, which I know, it's just weird. The whole thing's weird. But beyond that, whenever we consider that situation, we already covered in the laws on incest that this is not allowed. That it doesn't matter if it's your father's daughter to another woman or your mother's daughter to another man from a prior marriage. She's not allowed to be married if she's your sister in any capacity. Like if she's literally your sister through your mother or father, it's unlawful. It's incest. It's a type of adultery. It's a violation of the seventh commandment. So the reason why I'm giving you this information is because almost every time people want to destroy God's law, and I obviously personally believe that this is from Satan, he's the father of lies, this is the kind of thing to get people to start doubting God's law and how is it really eternal? But before you could do this and then you can't, now you can, so there's this you start the cycle of change and then you just keep the cycle of change
well,
up.
that's like the people that try to say that Adam and Eve's sons married their sisters.
Right.
And they're like, see, he allowed it back then.
And as strange as it is, and I operate on this premise systematically. I think when people do that, I think if you're convinced it's the truth, that's a whole different story. But when people see the difference and they still choose the contradiction to God's law, and I'm not saying it's because they want to marry their sister, but I am saying that it's probably because of some kind of innate sexual immorality that is in the heart of people, that we would want to believe that certain things are not violations of God's law, even when God says they are, so that they themselves are less guilty. So in other words, if you can pass the buck on to Abraham and say, well, he married his sister, and Adam and Eve married their brothers and sisters, and, you can keep that up, then you don't got to be so hard on your cousins and uncles that are homos. You can be a little bit more lax. Be like, well, God understands things. There's circumstances in the world that, we just don't. And that's what starts the whole, that's how you unlink the chain. And then eventually, God's law, who cares?
What's weird is that it's such a strange line that someone would have to hold in order to say that, siblings marrying is one thing that God didn't mind, even though in the same chapter he's talking about adultery being a sin, and God tells him that. Mm-hmm. And then plus, in Noah's time,
Lot.
Incest was wrong as well, and Lot's time.
Well, that's actually a really good point, Lot's situation. I've heard people try to say, well, line breeding, which is what it's called in the animal world, which is not unlawful in the animal world. It's not always wise, but nevertheless, line breeding, fathers and daughters and mothers and sons, is more wicked before God than brothers and sisters. But even the same law in Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20 condemns both as adultery and death penalty offenses. So there's really no way to argue that if you're taking God's law at face value.
Something I never understood, though, is why lie and say that Sarah's my sister. How is that protecting anything? 'Cause wouldn't you think that would make the guy think, hey, she's a marriageable candidate. I'm going to go for that. Rather than, that'd be more likely, you would think, than like, oh, that's his wife. I'll stay away from her.
You know, the only thing that I can think about that even resembles something like this is like tax law. You know, it's like
he's trying to do some little tax evasion.
Yeah, it's like the only thing I can even consider that sounds anything like this in the modern day is tax evasion. It's like, say you're my dependent, so we get a little bit more money at the end of the year.
Yeah, well, I traveled to the land of Egypt. I want to pay the
Maybe
tax.
thought like once, if like he already got the heads up that the person was going to take his wife as their wife, then he could somehow fix it and like sneak out of there with her.
Yeah.
Kind of blind the eye before he just gets killed.
Well, the funny thing is when he gets caught in the lie, Pharaoh's just like, oh, okay, why'd you tell me that? I almost, he's like, well, here's your wife back.
Yeah, he's like, well, I didn't think you feared God. And they're like, why?
Like they really weren't. They were kind of okay with the fact that he lied to them,
Yeah. Maybe they understood that some other places might kind of
just like, oh, okay.
kill you for your wife.
It was a common practice at that time. They're like, oh, you told that lie? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm not saying that.
I've heard of that one.
But the only thing I've ever, when you try to think about it from our perspective, is like the only thing I can think of anybody lying about their relationship with their wife would be something legal on paperwork. Like,
right.
Like it's the only thing I can even think about is why people today would be like, hey, say you're my sister living at home rather than my wife so that we don't gotta, like pay some kind. Yeah, there's some kind of other bonus. There's a perk.
Financial reason. Yeah. I got a question.
I'll go back just for a second. I actually knew a guy years and years ago, and I can talk about this because he's dead. Years and years ago, who he and his wife would never legally get married, and she claimed an address to another building on the property as hers, so they could get double welfare.
Double welfare.
So when I tell you that there's situations that it's like, well, we file our taxes and we're two independent people. We both got two different households. We get more money. And that's how people, so when I think of this, I think, I don't know what else it could be, but I'm probably totally wrong. I'm just saying it's what it makes me think about. Ed's going to speak. Go ahead.
About the fact that Abraham lied, sometimes in the Bible, like, who was it that lied to about the spies? She lied in the time of war. She said that
Ruth
went out to spy the land.
Rahab.
Rahab, right. And she said, no, they're not, the spies are not here. I haven't seen them. God doesn't reckon that as a lie. It's a time of war and to protect.
Yeah.
Actually doing the will of God.
Well, I'm not really worried about whether if it was a real lie or not, to be honest with you. That's between God and Abraham. But whether the lie is true is the question. Or whether it was truth or a lie. Would you like to say something? Probably not, but it's a good picture. Yeah. Mama can help you out with that. Well, one thing to know for sure is Abraham was a pretty good guy in regards to keeping God's law. And by the end of this, we'll have to bring this up again because in Genesis 26:5 it says, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments and my statutes and my laws, that he is going to bless Isaac, his son. So before Mount Sinai, before Moses, here is a full understanding that Abraham obeyed God's voice or his word, kept his charge, his commandments, his statutes, and his laws. Now, I have to say this because now we're going to switch gears and we're going to go look at Abraham's marriage to Hagar. Very controversial. So, if you want to go to, let's see, where are we going? 16, Genesis 16. Get it someone else that wants to read. Can I get a volunteer for 16? Okay. Levi?
Wait, Genesis chapter 16?
Yep.
The whole chapter?
Or you guys can split it up.
I'll read the whole chapter.
16 verse.
Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid, and it may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. And Sarai said unto Abram, My wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and thee. But Abram said unto Sarai, Behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarai dealt hardly with her, she fled from her. And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence camest thou? And whither wilt thou go? She said, I flee from the face of my mistress, Sarai. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Return to thy mistress, and submit thyself under her hand. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. And he will be a wild man, his hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. And she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou God seest me. For she said, Have I also here looked after him that seeth me? Wherefore the well was called
Lahairoi.
Beer-lahai-roi. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bare Abram a son, and Abram called his son's name, which Hagar bare, Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram.
So, 86 years old. Sarah has this discussion that she's going to give, very similar to what we already covered in Jacob's situation, where the wife takes one of her handmaids and says, I want you to have her as your wife and have children, and they'll be counted as my children. But things kind of go wrong here in this situation. Rather than it glorifying Sarah and her being thankful to Sarah, it starts to cause disunity in the household. And Hagar starts looking at herself in sounds like a prideful way, and disrespecting Sarah and Abraham both. But not just that, it also, eventually gets to a point where Isaac is born, and Isaac is then being made fun of basically by the older son. So you're still going to have this relationship of the older son, younger son going on. Anybody who has two siblings in the house, one older and one younger, knows how this goes. And they antagonize each other. And apparently whatever the antagonism was, it sounds like Hagar, because they're from two different mothers, is pretty much championing her son to antagonize Isaac. Because you have to remember, in the mentality of the day, the firstborn son is the heir, regardless of who the wife is. And so the book of Galatians does give us an understanding on how the free woman and the non-free woman, that there is a distinction in the way that works. But God's law, as far as inheritance goes, actually forbids us to favor one child over the other if they be of two different women, and in a polygyny situation. And so in this situation here, technically, Abraham, you would think, would have had to favor Ishmael as the oldest son. And you do see that before this situation, it is Abraham that says to God, he says, oh, that Ishmael may live before you, you remember. And so these things eventually end up adding up to where we have problems, that Ishmael basically gets himself disinherited. Ishmael gets circumcised when he's 13 years old, so he lives until probably manhood with Abraham. And these problems probably develop in teenage years a little bit more. So when you think about it from that angle, Ishmael is accountable for his actions too as time goes on. You know, it's not just simply, it's not just a child prodding another child. You literally have a conscious adult, Hagar, who's supposed to be Abraham's wife, and the law of God says that when a man marries a woman, even in a polygamous relationship, that two become one. So the man and the woman become one flesh. The problem is that Hagar is not treating Abraham well because of how he's treating the son of the promise, which was actually the one God promised to be Isaac through Sarah before Hagar even came into the picture. So the promise was already there, and Hagar and Ishmael are not respecting that promise. They are saying, hey, wait, we've got the oldest son here, and the oldest son's going to inherit, and there's this mentality developing. And so you can see in verse 5 it says, Sarah said to Abraham, my wrong's upon me, I've given my maid into thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes, and the Lord judged between me and thee. And so Abraham said unto Sarah, behold, thy maid is in thy hand, do to her as it pleases thee. And when Sarah dealt hardly with her, meaning she probably beat her up, she fled from the face of her maid, and an angel of the Lord, which is a fairly specific angel. Usually people believe that this is a manifestation of Christ in one way or another. But he's a specific angel of the Lord that's mentioned all throughout the Bible, comes and tells Hagar to return and go back to where she's supposed to go to, and she goes back home. But these problems don't end. And we know that things continued, even though this contention starts, right? That then after that, we end up with Abraham circumcising Ishmael in chapter 17. And then we end up having another conflict of some sort that eventually has Hagar getting divorced by chapter 21. So if you want to go to 21, we'll cover that next. And then we will go back over the 3 points of marriage in Hagar. So if you're in 21, we'll get Levi to read. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, you want to read from 21, right?
Yeah, just read from 1 down to pretty long chapter. Just read down to 20.
21 from 1 to 20.
Yeah.
And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bare Abraham. His son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah bare to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, being 8 days old, as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old when the son Isaac was born unto him. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all that hear will laugh with me. And she said, who would have said unto Abraham that Sarah should have given children suck? For I have borne him a son in his old age. And this child grew and was weaned. And Abraham made a great feast that same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw that the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, which she had born unto Abraham, mocking. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be here with me, with my son, even with Isaac. And the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight, because of his son. And God said unto Abraham, Let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad, and because of the bondwoman, and all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice. For in Isaac shall thy seed be called, and also of the son of thy bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and took bread and a bottle of water, and gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, and the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered into the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. And she went and sat her down over against him, and a good way off, as it were a bow shot. For she said, Let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him, and lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad. And the angel of God called to Hagar out of the heaven, and said unto her, What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. Rise, lift up the lad, and hold him in thine hand, for I will make him a great nation. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the bottle with water, and gave the lad drink. And God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness, and became an archer. And he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt.
So we have our first biblical divorce, and I'll show you how this was a divorce in Scripture. We see that Abraham doesn't really want to do this. It's grievous to him, makes him sad, makes him upset, but what's going on, and you also, like I said, you have to remember, we have Hagar who is instigating this. She's despising Sarah for years. This is years of this going on. This isn't like she just did it one day and they threw her out of the house. Years is going on. She has influenced Ishmael to mock Isaac, who's the son of the promise. And if you look at it, the circumcision was a perfect circumcision, 8th day, just like God commanded for a covenant child. So Ishmael's kind of like an after covenant. He gets the circumcision, but he's 13 when it happens. Isaac gets it properly done. A feast is proclaimed at his weaning. Ishmael probably didn't get a feast at his weaning. And so you have these like very special celebrations, because we have to go all the way back to Genesis 12 to remember when God calls Abraham out of his country, he says he's going to give him and Sarah a son, a descendant. So the promise from as far back as Abraham has been receiving the promises of God, it applied to Sarah. It didn't apply to Hagar. Sarah misinterprets this thing, and Sarah says, okay, well, we can do this a different way. Let's do it through Hagar. And a proper marriage takes place. It's a marriage. It's a God-ordained marriage. There's nobody can argue that, because it happens all throughout the ancient world. But it creates a contention in the relationship that has to then be dealt with later on, and it takes years for this to progress. And so you can see that this takes a lot of time to build up, and you can't be, I don't think you can be 100% certain as to how old Ishmael is, but he's definitely older than 13. He's a cognitive teenager. He can make his own choices, and he's still mocking a child. So, you know, like I said, anybody who has brothers in the house know that the kids fight and prod each other. But when you've got a full-grown teenage boy picking on a year-old kid, you've got a problem, you know. And so, and the mother's helping it and instigating it. So it's a bad situation. And you can see Sarah, she just decides to, she just flips. She's like, that's it, cast out this bondwoman. And no longer is she even talking of her like, it's your wife. So get rid of this slave. You know, it becomes really, it sounds like it gets pretty rough. And so Abraham's 100 years old when we know that Isaac was born, and so it happened after the weaning process. That could have been a year or two. like I said, so we're talking about a teenage boy, older teenage boy most likely that this is going on with, and both of them are cast out of the house. Not just, now under most laws of divorce, the child doesn't get cast out. At least we don't read about it in the Bible anywhere else. Usually the father retains the child. The reason why I'm saying that Ishmael must have been culpable in some way is because he goes with mom. And that's unusual. And so most likely Ishmael, even though there's a little bit of friendly nature going on in the future between Isaac and him, they bury their father together and things like that happen, they don't really talk to each other, and they're kind of not on good terms. And so that happens. Now, whenever you go down in the scripture and you see the words cast out and send away, go to Deuteronomy chapter 24, and you will see that in the law of divorce in Deuteronomy, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, last book of the law, we have the law for divorce that's given by God through Moses. It says, when a man has taken a wife and marries her, and it comes to pass that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some uncleanness. Now, I can also say that this word uncleanness could be translated nakedness as well, in her, then let him write her a bill of divorcement and give it into her hand and send her out of his house. Now that word, send her out, is then repeated in 3. When she is departed out of his house, she may go and be another man's wife, and if the latter husband hate her, and write her a bill of divorcement and give it in her hand and send her out of his house. And so there's 2 sendings going on, same sending. We're dealing with the Hebrew word that is shalak, that's the word, and it's the same word used when they send Hagar out of the house. So this idea of being sent out of the house is exactly consistent with the law of divorce in Deuteronomy 24. So it's a divorce. It's literally being sent out of the house. And while God's law says there needs to be a writ of divorcement, and we aren't given the specifics of whether he did that or not, I guess we don't know for sure, but I would say that since Abraham was a lawful man, according to Genesis 26, as we read prior, since he obeyed God's laws, he probably did give her something so that she could go and be another man's wife. Or maybe he didn't want her to ever remarry again. And no man in the ancient world, other than the type of guys who would abduct your wife, if they think she's your sister, would take her. So I don't know. I mean, I guess there's a possibility he didn't because he didn't want her to remarry. But whatever it may be, she's sent out of the house in a divorced fashion, and he's no longer taking care of her. He gives her some provisions. God says he's going to take care of her. But these are the things that need to then be dealt with in the text in order to say this is not a divorce, which I've heard people say that. Well, it's not really a divorce. Now, the law goes on in divorcement that it says, if the latter husband hate her, meaning her new husband, hate her and write her a bill of divorcement and gives it into her hand and sends her out of his house, or if the latter husband would die, which took her to be his wife, her former, the first husband, which sent her away, may not take her again to be his wife. After that, she's defiled. So we'll just cover the laws of divorce a little bit. This is an abomination before God, and you shall not cause the land to sin which the Lord your God giveth thee. And you notice this language is the same language as we read in Leviticus 18, Leviticus 20, where it says it will curse the land. The land will suffer because of the breaking of this law. And so what it's basically saying is once a man marries a woman, all 3 points are consistently met. Once that happens, then she could be divorced for certain reasons, which we'll cover those in a minute. We'll see how Hagar met all those. And she's kicked out of the house. She's gone, sent away. She can't marry her first husband again after she's married or had relations with another man. It's unlawful. Can't happen. And so God basically puts that down. But once that happens, it can't be done. And we covered this in our Romans Bible study, actually, when we've been.
But they could remarry if she never became another man's wife.
If she never had sex with another man,
right,
then she could, and consummation would be the point. I guess there's a good conversation that could be had as to whether she's betrothed, because technically betrothal is as strong as marriage. So whether she has been contracted for marriage, basically, again, a second time, whether that would also disallow her. But I think the focus is basically on union. It's on the consummation aspect, because it refers to it as an abomination, and the language fits right in with Leviticus 18 and 20 as a sexual sin.
So where I always run into problems is like in conversation with other people, that they'll say that once somebody's divorced, like a woman's been divorced, she can't be remarried because of what Christ said.
Right. We'll cover that here in a minute too.
Okay. Yeah. Because I've had friendly arguments with people about that, and I didn't really have anything to say other than, well, it says here in Deuteronomy. But of course, they were dispensationalists,
right?
People, so they didn't care what I had to say about Deuteronomy.
Right. Well, if you go back to that law that we were just looking at, you do have to do a little bit of language study to get to it. And the reason I mentioned to you that there was a difference in translation depending on which translation you're reading is one, and even King James has a little editorial note. Most of them will have a little letter or number, and then it'll right under the verse it'll give you an alternative translation. And it either says that it is a matter of nakedness, or it will say that it is uncleanness. And the Hebrew word can go both ways, but the point that you can extract from paying attention to the rest of the Bible and looking at the story of Hagar and knowing Abraham was a lawful man and he wouldn't have done something outside of God's laws, we know Hagar did not commit relations with anybody else. She wasn't an adulteress or a fornicator. She rather despised the child, caused problems in the home, and whenever it refers to a form of nakedness, it literally is uncovering of the head. And so we studied 1 Corinthians 11:3, for instance. I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. And also in Numbers chapter 30, which I won't read, the headship order of the man being the head and the woman being bound to her husband through promises and things like that is established by God. So headship order is a very biblical thing, very important biblical aspect. And whenever you read that it's a type of uncleanness or a type of nakedness, the best way for you, and we'll see how Jesus actually agrees with this, the best way to understand it is just like you see in the story of Hagar. Here's Hagar breaking headship. She's not obeying Abraham. She's not obeying Sarah, who is actually overcharged of her. She's the first wife. She's the master. This lady's being called a mistress, which is like the feminine version of master. It's like masteress, right? So Sarah is a masteress. She's the female master of Hagar. There is an order in the home that gives Sarah preeminence because she's the first wife. And Hagar's causing a division in the body, right? So marriage is a body. When two become one, they become one body, right? What God joins together, no man's supposed to put apart. So Sarah and Abraham are one body, and Hagar is attached to that body, which is Abraham's body. It's Abraham's family. And this is hard for us to understand because we aren't polygamists, but we don't look at it like, no, it's just a man and just a woman. That's all that marriage is. In the ancient mindset, that's not what it was. It was actually the man's body, and the women had children with him, and his body grew because they all come from his tribe. They're all part of his patriarchal line. So that's the way in the ancient mindset. So when Hagar comes into the family and starts disrupting the unity of the household and challenging Abraham and Sarah, she becomes subject of divorce. Abraham's lawfully allowed to kick her out of the house, and the reason for that is because she has uncovered her head. There's a form of nakedness or uncleanness in the way that she's acting. She's going to destroy the body, the marriage body. And this goes back to Genesis chapter 2, wherefore a man leaves father and mother, they being two shall be one flesh. So, and this is something that you kind of have to tie together with Scripture. Ephesians 6, I'm not sure if we covered that already in this study or not. Ephesians 5 and 6. It says, wives, submit yourselves, this is verse 22, 5:22. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as unto the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church. He is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject to Christ, so let wives be to their own husbands, subject in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of the water of the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loves himself, for no man ever yet hates his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, even as the Lord the church. For we are members of his body and of his flesh and of his bone. For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence or honor her husband. So the reason I'm reading this is because men and women are one body. When the headship is uncovered, the head is